So welcome to the industry panel. We have a great group of colleagues here today. We're gonna have a discussion about ethics of partnerships between industry and academia in the social media space. We are going to let each participant introduce themselves and give you a little bit of background. And then we will kind of have a framework to discuss things, but please feel free to use the Q&A function to ask specific questions. We have Dr. Glen Coppersmith here from Qntfy, Dr. Sanjay Kairam from Twitch, Dr. Laura Kikin from Facebook, and Dr. Sarah LaRocca from Facebook. So we'll just go in no particular order, but Dr. Glen Coppersmith, could you please introduce yourself and give us a little background about what it is that you do?
Yeah, Kyle, thanks for having me here. And as we were saying before everyone got on, this has been a wonderfully organized and fun conference to be part of, so thanks for that. I'm the founder and CEO of Qntfy. And so my background prior to Qntfy, I'm a computer scientist and a psychologist by training. And so a lot of the work that I've done over my career is using computer science techniques to understand human behavior. A lot of that work recently has been in mental health and well-being. And so this is some of the work that Qntfy does, is understanding data outside the healthcare system. How is it useful for health, and how do we take that and meaningfully affect people's lives with that?
Thank you, Glenn. Sanjay, would you like to go next?
Hi, my name's Sanjay Kairam. I'm at Twitch. My parents are both physicians, so I wish I had that recording of someone calling me doctor at UCSF, even though we're the fake kinds of doctors. I am a research scientist. I work on our community health team, trying to basically understand how do we quantify outcomes like harassment, safety, feelings of community, feelings of connection, and then operationalize those in products that we can use to help people on the platform.
Great, thank you. Dr. Laura Kikin, would you mind going next?
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. My background is as a health psychologist, and I'm now the health research manager at Facebook. Previously, I was in academia at University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and at Stanford. At Facebook, I lead a team of researchers who overall are studying how Facebook can promote individual and public health. So we have a wide range of research studies that we're conducting in that space.
Great, thank you. And last but not least, Dr. Sarah LaRocca.
Hey everyone, yeah, my name's Sarah LaRocca. I am a research scientist at Facebook. I am on the demography and survey science team there, which does kind of a wide variety of social science research, but focused on using surveys to measure outcomes, essentially. My background is actually in environmental engineering, but with a focus on risk and decision analysis, so sort of health adjacent. And I have been working since April on our COVID-19 symptom survey that we are fielding in conjunction with Carnegie Mellon and University of Maryland. Basically, the way this works is that Facebook invites users to participate in the survey, but then they're directed to take the survey that's hosted by either UMD or CMU, and they have all the data there to protect privacy. So I'm sort of the interface between Facebook and these academic institutions in fielding the survey.
Wonderful, thank you. So again, the format's going to be, we'll be posing some general questions to our panelists, and they're going to give us their perspectives. But if you have something specific you'd like to ask, please put it in the Q&A function on Zoom, and we will get to the questions as they come up. So we kind of have a general session objectives slide that we'd like to show you now, if possible. But if not, we can simply just get into it. So the first question that we're going to discuss as a group is pertains to the skills that these scientists have acquired during their time in academia, and how they may or may not directly translate into their current industry settings, their current job descriptions, and their responsibilities. Would anyone like to go take the first shot at it? Glenn, do you want to go first?
Yeah, all right. I'll jump in there. We had a lively discussion prior to this, and now I think everyone might be a little gun shy. So my time in academia, both as a grad student and as a professor at Hopkins, really came down to the critical skill that I learned that has matriculated so powerfully into industry was the clarity of thought and learning how to tell a story. And so much of my job, especially now in my current role, but almost throughout, has been explaining one side's discipline to another, right? I've always lived between psychology and computer science, or between business and technology. And so being able to understand technology enough and the space and the research that we're doing in a way that we can clearly tell a story to the other side was a skill I have to practice a lot while a computer scientist in a psych department. And then sort of throughout. And so this storytelling ability, while it doesn't feel like it's a technical one, it has been absolutely critical. And it's sort of how do you make the correct 10,000-foot view for this particular person? And so that may not be that's not an easy thing to pick up and run a tutorial on, but it's certainly at the core of the academic experience is sharing the research, sharing your findings, sharing your intuition, and yet here it is matriculating into industry in a really powerful way.
Thank you.
I'd say related, I think one aspect is really thinking clearly about measurement, like what are the tools we have to measure and what are the outcomes we're trying to measure? Where are they related and where are they different? Trying to maintain like a rich mental model around those things, communicate. That's something that we do really well as academics. And in industry, suddenly people start talking about metrics and they lose sight of the thing that was trying to be measured. So as a scientist, you're saying, okay, well, let's understand all the interpretations and why a metric can change, how that could relate to the outcome. And I think that's a really important thing that you can bring from academia into industry.
That's great, thank you. Laura, Sarah, would you like to weigh in?
Sure. I think for me, being able to start from an abstract question that you want to answer and then kind of go from start to finish in scoping a research question and then turning that into a design. This kind of goes along the lines of the measurement point there. But also, I think it's really important to be able to synthesize work that has already been done and use that to figure out, okay, what gaps can I fill in, and what can I rely on others' work for, so that you can kind of make sure that what you're contributing is valuable to the question you're trying to answer and you're not reinventing the wheel.
That's great, thank you.
Yeah, I completely agree with all of the things that the other panelists have said so far. And I think I will add that, there are many roles, right? And being in a management track, one thing that I think I underestimated when I was in academia were all the experiences and skills that I was developing in project management and people management. And that then when I realized that really helped me to find my path. And I think that those skills are invaluable in industry. So those are skills sometimes that we may not see that we're developing in academia, but they're very, very valuable.
Yeah, thank you. So at PRISM, it's an interdisciplinary conference. It makes up we had a high school student in one of the earlier networking sessions, a lot of graduate students and different trainees and all the way up to full professors and people like industry, like yourselves. So we're going to pose a question to the audience about where they potentially expect to spend most of their time. I mean, if you're a trainee, think about this answer in terms of the near future. If you haven't been in an established position for many years, maybe think about if you're going to stay put in academics or transition outside of academics, just so we can have an idea of who's in the audience and what people might be looking for from this discussion. But to piggyback off our initial question, I'd like to ask the panelists about, what advice would you give to recent graduates looking to transition into industry settings? Many, especially doctoral candidates about to hit the job market, are looking to cast a wide net. With only so many academic positions to be had, it's great to set up our trainees for a diverse set of job opportunities, and the skills that would be required, and may vary by opportunity. So what, if anything, would you like to kind of advise anyone out there? Sarah, do you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah, I was going to say that I think talk to as many people as possible, and keep an open mind as you start to think about what kind of roles you might be interested in. I think, I sort of ended up in a more social science role, focusing on, a big health survey now, and I was an engineer in grad school. So I think, your skills can be useful in a lot of different areas. So talking to as many people as possible just is really helpful to get a sense of what does real life look like in different types of jobs.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Laura, would you like to go next?
Sure. I agree with what Sarah said. I think one thing that stands out for me is just connecting to your passion and exploring the desired or potential impact of the companies that you are interested in. The impact is what really matters, and it's also what will make our own passion connect to the company and why we're interested, and ultimately be the source of motivation. And so I think that would be a starting place. I know for me, that's what brought me to Facebook. I saw this potential for really broad impact, and that was just so inspiring and powerful for me. So I would really recommend that you always keep that in mind.
Yeah, thank you. Glen, earlier in a discussion, we talked about measurable impact, looking at substantive relationships rather than statistical significant relationships. Do you want to add on to what Laura just mentioned?
Yeah, I like how you avoided saying quantifying an impact, because I get a nickel every time everyone says quantify. That's how this works. No, there's something to that, right? So that this is a huge difference. Both Sarah and Laura are talking about a shift in effectively like keeping options open, because you don't really know what's happening there. And it's not really clear where you can have a ton of impact, right? And so like I had a very circuitous route through my life here. And this is the thing that has been sort of stable here, is that the tiny little effects don't matter. The tiny little findings don't really matter. And once we get into industry, we actually want to see what is meaningful and important. P-values don't matter, right? Even effect sizes to some extent don't matter. What really matters is how is it going to have the impact on human life? What is the like downstream impact that we're talking about? What's your mission impact? And so this is a slightly different way of thinking things, right? Of approaching things from the way in which we've done in academia, trying to publish the cleanest paper, when in fact, at least some of the people that I work with know that like I don't want, if I need to run statistics to understand if that worked, it's not a big enough impact. It's not a big enough shift in what we're talking about. And so to back one step off of that, right? Like maybe looking at the size of the effect that you're having with a particular treatment, if you want to think about it that way, or whatever your experimental condition is, that at least gets us closer to that, and that's something that's more accepted by the statistical practice here. Just to get geeky for a moment, but that is something that is a bit of a hard shift from academia, right? Ultimately, that may be a statistically significant, but is it an operationally significant difference? That's the question I always end up that resonates with me with any paper that I'm reading,
Oh, that's
or
great.
writing for that matter.
Yeah, thank you. Sanjay, would you like to weigh in?
Yeah, I think I'll just kind of extend on that theme of impact and say even beyond just sort of like, I think what Glen was raising around sort of thinking about how you quantify or how you measure that impact, and then also looking at what you get to go do with the results of those findings. You know, my background was I was in an HCI program studying online communities. You write a paper, you have discussions, implications, you could have the best path forward. You could have very clear results, and you may not be able to necessarily convince anyone to turn that into real change on an online platform. If you're studying misinformation, if you're studying content moderation, harassment, abuse, I think you have to get lucky to have people that are reading those papers in industry sometimes. Whereas if you're working in industry, I get to present that to my CEO and say, here's what we found, what are we gonna do about it? That to me really resonates. But of course, it's an important consideration. What's the type of research you want to do? There's going to be different constraints working in an academic or an industry environment. So just thinking critically about what do you want your research to do?
Yeah, that's great. So going back to the poll, it looks like about 80% of our audience members are looking to be in academia on various tracks, tenure and non-tenure. But so we'll go to the Q&A box, and we're going to see a question about what would be your wish list, in quotes, for collaborating with academic groups, and what can we do to foster partnership? Anyone like to go first?
I'll go quickly here. This is a sort of what are we looking for in academic partners generally is around applied research. And so this may be different from different spaces that we're going. Right? The other people on the panel may have some different perspectives, given that they're slightly larger companies than we are. But ultimately, like we have a pretty near-term impact that we're trying to have, and so finding researchers that are aligned to that has been wonderful. When we do find them, the ability to really dig in on a problem that might have an effect in 3 or 6 months, or right now, is actually really the critical difference. Before we get to write a paper, we have to somehow change the trajectory, understand and improve a system somehow, and then we can write a paper about it, as opposed to the other way around.
Thank you. Anyone else would like to weigh in on wish lists about academic and industry partnerships?
Yeah, I could sort of, again, I think we're all sort of talking about the same sort of themes. Understanding the constraints we're in with industry sometimes that have to do with product deadlines, have to do with privacy is a big one. I know this crowd obviously understands like HIPAA and user privacy, but sometimes working with researchers, it's really hard to explain why we can or can't share different types of data under different agreements. And I would think, yeah, I mean, often my viewpoint is, companies are going to be critical of the research that comes out. Sometimes I think about it in the space of content moderation harassment. It's, if we find something bad, I feel like we need to take the time also to figure out how we're going to fix it before we're able to publish that work, which is great. That again, that speaks back to impact. It's like, we find something that doesn't look so great and we design a solution. That's actually a really great research arc, but it's the kind of thing that's going to take a little bit longer and is going to require some flexibility in terms of deciding what's going to be published and how, and it's just something to consider when you're working with industry folks.
Yeah, and what about when we think about your specific in workplaces, looking for topic matter experts or domain specific experts, and how someone maybe at a company like Facebook might not have the particular expertise on a specific behavior or disease or a topic that might speak to misinformation. Do you ever search out individuals in academia to fill those types of roles?
I can weigh in on that. I think we definitely do. I think domain expertise is one of the top things that we consider and are looking for. We do have some domain experts within Facebook, but the range of topics we may be studying and the range of interventions we would be interested in learning about can be quite broad. And so connecting with domain experts is critically important. So being able to highlight your domain expertise even if you think it's obvious, it may not, the value is really important. So being able to highlight it is something I would emphasize. Sarah,
Yeah,
you may also have thoughts. Oh.
Yeah, would you say that, having someone clearly communicate what they're an expert in lay terms as a way to signal to you if people are looking to make these partnerships, to make sure they kind of run it by individuals outside of their field to make sure this resonates with a broader audience? Because if you're looking for an expert in subject matter Y and the way that they interpret and communicate that doesn't resonate with you or is in a language foreign to you, then that could be a definite roadblock.
That's a really good point. Absolutely. Keeping it in lay terms and in a sense, keeping it simple is where I would start. Yeah.
Sarah, do you have anything on?
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, I think for a concrete example for this symptom survey that we're running, to Laura's point, like my team at Facebook has heavy survey experience, but we are not necessarily all health experts. And Carnegie Mellon's team are experts in forecasting flu, which kind of led them to forecasting COVID, which is why ultimately we partnered with them. And then similarly, this survey is, some people have said it's the largest health survey that's ever been fielded. And so it really requires a lot of consideration of internationalizing a survey and really just being able to deliver at scale, which is why we're working with the University of Maryland, which is a program that has expertise in survey methodology. So yeah, I think the expertise is really key, like supplementing what our skills at Facebook are. And the other piece is, I'm not sure it's always true, but I think that Facebook and probably many companies, when we are doing these partnerships, we want to be able to share the findings. The value of these partnerships is often that they're a little bit more public than kind of work that we do internally. And so we want to be able to make sure that the findings are shared with the academic community and with the the health community or whoever is the relevant stakeholder for the subject matter. And so I think that's a consideration as well, like, being able to show that you have a plan for disseminating your findings, I think is often very important.
No, that's great. There's two kind of related questions posed in the chat and the Q&A box here. And one is, are there any opportunities with pilot funding with any of the work you are all conducting? And do you recommend other industry pilot funding where we can gain experience in order to foster a relationship with industry? And then kind of along the same lines, an individual asks, what about new researchers or junior faculty with smaller budgets or that don't have external grants supporting their research right now? How can they find ways to collaborate with folks in industry in order to facilitate partnerships inside and outside of academia? Anyone like to take the first step? Facebook folks?
From the smaller business perspective, which might be slightly different, I'll give the Facebook people a chance to think through this, because it's a tough one, right? And so this is a lot of the difficulty that we run into is the amount of time that the university lawyers require of us to do anything. And so we have in the past given grants to postdoc researchers or grad students to work on problems that are interesting. And critically, they don't find us, we find them, right? We are reading their research, we find some of this stuff. And so that I don't know what I can tell you to be helpful there, but there are people we identified saying, that's really useful. I would fund you for 6 months to work on that if you're willing to. And then it takes us 9 months to deal with the university lawyers to get 6 months of work done. So like that, so looking at it for like a short-term perspective is hard, but looking to establish like a long-term partnership is probably the better way to think about those things rather than like an SBIR or some other smaller grant mechanism.
Okay, great, thank you.
In Facebook, I think there might be a number of answers to this question. One is that we have recently had a funding competition. So there was an RFP for proposals related to misinformation. And so this is an example of there can be funding opportunities, funding announcements. We're actually posted at our research website, I believe. And there are also, I think, a variety of ways that we collaborate with academics. So the nature of that collaboration can really vary. So I would say even somebody who is in a situation where you don't have an NIH grant or something like that, there are still plenty of opportunities. So if you're interested, I would definitely reach out.
Yeah, I would say that actually this is, you know, an area where people who are just starting their careers can be more successful. I reviewed requests, an RFP for a project about a year ago, and you know, I think one of the criteria is certainly, you know, do we think you can do what you say you're going to do? And obviously, like, history of funding is part of that, but I don't think that it is, you know, valued as heavily as it might be at like traditional granting institutions. So I think definitely these RFPs are an area where, you know, if you have a good idea and a solid research plan, that's going to be valued really heavily, rather than, you know, your prestige necessarily in the field.
Well, that's a great point. Yeah, thank you.
I'd also indicate that, you know, even in a context where, I mean, Twitch might be maybe less in the position to provide funding necessarily, but I guess also remember that an industry partnership can also mean that industry can take on some of the costs of running the research itself. You know, if we're running a big survey and we're able to include measures that kind of help with a collaborative research project, that's a really great way to sort of defray, you know, a large cost that would have been incorporated in funding concerns.
Great, thank you. This specific question for Sarah. How were the university and University of Maryland and Carnegie Mellon chosen to work on the Facebook COVID survey? How did that relationship develop, if you know specifically?
Yeah, so I actually kind of joined the project maybe like 2 or 3 weeks after it started, which on the scale of how quickly things were evolving was, you know, years in April. But I mean, I think to my point before, they were chosen basically because they had complementary expertise. And in particular, we wanted somebody with health and specifically forecasting, because at that time we felt like forecasting was really important for the pandemic. So we wanted the expertise that Carnegie Mellon had already to supplement our ability to deliver the survey. And then because the institutions, like I said, because they are actually the ones fielding the survey, we're just inviting users. That's why we wanted at least one of them to have a really strong background in survey methodology as well.
So if I'm understanding, the researchers at these two institutions had a clear expertise that you identified, and that's how it really became.
Yeah, and my understanding is that we were, you know, a lot of people were interested in this, and ultimately, you know, we couldn't go with that. We couldn't work with everyone, and so we just kind of had to pick a few partners.
Okay, great, thank you. So a question, I'm gonna try to paraphrase here because it's lengthy. Do larger industry partners see value in contributing towards obtaining NIH grants for academic collaborations? In other words, is there a PR value there? Is there a data for good value there if you work on an NIH funded study in partnership with an academic institution? Does anyone have anything to say about that?
I think it's an interesting idea. I don't have an immediate answer, to be honest. I think that overall we're interested in understanding how we can accomplish our mission and how to have impact. I think if it's an opportunity to do that, then that's what would interest us most. Or if there's the expertise and the skill. But I'm curious to hear other perspectives on this too.
I'll speak from a smaller size business perspective there. The grants are interesting, but the timeline is really tough, right? We're the reason that we survive is because we're agile and we can adjust. And so the grant funding cycle is really, really rough to negotiate there. And then on the other side of this, like I know certain companies have easier time getting money. So the money doesn't do anything for them necessarily, like some other people on this call, where the amount of effort that would go into building that grant might not be worth it in the ways that we traditionally think about it. It's interesting how the grant cycle hasn't really kept up with the way that industry is forced to do business these days.
In other words, you can't submit a project and wait 2 years to figure out whether or not you can take any action further on that project?
Yep, that sounds about right.
The 24-month timeline isn't agile enough.
Yeah, even the 3 and 6 months SBIR deadline, those are tough because we're talking about a year from now, we would finally get results from whatever the question is that we now currently have clarity to answer.
Any other comments on that? No? So another question came in about pilot funding. Are there opportunities with pilot funding with any of the work you are all working in? We kind of touched upon that earlier. Maybe folks want something more specific. If you know of any links or places to look at RFPs, maybe we could share it in the chat, or you could post it on Twitter with the PRISM hashtag to direct people into a specific direction. But anyone else have anything to add about pilot funding from your organization?
Well, I suppose I'll probably get in trouble if I don't mention that Amazon more widely has a bunch of different kind of funding, different ways to apply for funding, Amazon Research Awards, the Amazon Scholars Program. I'll just briefly mention that as another opportunity for places for people to look.
Great, thank you. And Sarah has posted a link to research awards from Facebook. So thank you, Sarah.
Yeah, I don't think there's any open RFPs right now, but if you click on closed awards, you can see what these announcements typically look like, and they come out pretty frequently.
Great, thank you. So we have 5 minutes, and there's one more question in the Q&A box. Partnerships between academia and industry often, if not always, require formal agreements negotiated between representative offices and lawyers who are not on the research team specifically. So sometimes these contract negotiations can hold up collaborations and hold up the research itself. So do you have any recommendations on what the best ways for an academic and industry partnership to address these types of challenges?
There's probably someone in your department who has done this successfully, right? Your university is different from everybody else's. And so finding someone that you know and trust that can help you avoid the first handful of those problems is a solid first move. And on the second one, especially if your university is good about these sorts of things, if you have a good lawyer on the university side, you can convince them, listen, there is zero value. They often get wrapped up around intellectual property stuff. Like there's zero value to any of us if we're going to hold on to that intellectual property and never do anything with it. And some of them do understand that there is real value in letting this stuff go out and actually have impact that's larger for the benefit of the university, instead of saying, well, we want 20% of the company to be able to allow for this thing to be used by them or something like this, which is what sometimes happens.
Anyone else? Okay, if that's perfectly fine, thank you. So a question and a comment, several of us, some of the folks in the audience have worked on studies on Twitter and Facebook where the platform UI or data access features change right before or during a study. How can we prepare for this or find out about feature changes sooner? Does anyone have an idea there? It's a very specific technical question.
I resonate so bad that, yeah, I hear you.
Okay, yeah, that was a tough one.
I would say, yeah, that's going to be a challenge. I think working with any company, all of these things are always kept confidential, you know, even from our partners, everybody. So, I mean, that is a challenge. One of the best ways is if you're working with researchers and you're under an NDA, that is one way you might be able to learn about these things sooner. So collaborations.
Okay, great. We have just 2 minutes left. How do you feel about who owns the data in these? Can researchers own the data? What if findings don't look good for your company? How does that affect publications? Have any of you had experiences where during an academic industry partnership, there is a issue over who owns the data and what one can do with the data with respect to publishing and promoting the findings?
So the users own the data. None of us do.
Right.
There are some derivatives from that one might own. And at least what we've done at Qntfy is to say that if we've helped you get to this point in the data, then we should be authors on the paper, whatever you're doing with it. And so that doesn't mean that we're going to stop you from publishing it if it doesn't look good for us. We've somehow proven that our algorithms don't actually predict risk, right? What that actually means is that we have a chance to really put that in context and to say, here's what it actually looks like, and to be part of the process of how it is disseminated so that it's adequately contextualized. And ultimately, if the science really does prove that this is damaging for the company, that what we're doing is not working, I want to know that more than anything else, right? Because I will do something else that is effective. Maybe your mileage may vary depending upon companies, but at least if we're talking about health and public health and mental health, like we're all in this, not because we think we're going to make lots of money, but because there's going to be a great human impact there. And so I'd be a little surprised if you found companies that really were trying to hide all of these things if they were really out for good.
Yeah.
I agree with that. Everything Glenn said, you said that beautifully.
Well, we are just about out of time, so I'd like to thank our panelists for their insight and their time today. And I hope the participants in the audience enjoyed our discussion. And if you have any pressing questions, the panelists have put their email, their Twitter handles in the chat, so feel free to reach out to them. And thank you for your time.